I want to do a discussion piece talking about something that I frequently end up having conversations with a lot of people about, and that's about the retro video game bubble, and about its inevitable bursting because, well, unfortunately, things eventually have to hit that glass ceiling, so to speak, and something's gotta give. Prices cannot continue to escalate non-stop without eventually just tapering off and then, well, falling off. Now, RGT 85, Sean Long had also made a video about this, as well as Pat NES on the CU podcast discussing this. Obviously, both of them had two completely different views on the matter, and I want to throw in my 2 cents on the matter just because, well, I'm an opinionated motherfucker, and that's kind of what I do. See, I want to bring up something that I didn't see anybody else really go and discuss, and that was the entire market shift for a retro video game bubble. See, retro video games is going... The actual label of what is retro changes depending on who you end up talking to, because it depends on what they grew up with and what they consider to be old and retro. See, let's look at the NES and the SNES, which are two systems that are notorious and infamous for being kind of expensive with some of the more commanding and higher-end titles out there. Now, both of those systems have titles respectively on them that were brought up as examples of games that have kind of just hit that glass ceiling, and now the prices are pretty much just staying where they're at, or they're slowly falling off. And there's plenty of reasons for something like that happening, and this happens in virtually all markets where collecting becomes a thing. And video games aren't going to suddenly and just magically be excluded from this happening. This is normal. You can look at anything out there that has a collectability factor applied to it, and video games are just like that. Eventually, you just get that 1% of people who are willing to pay the most astronomical prices, and then that's really it. Everybody else is going to kind of just wait it out so that they can get it for a better price. Or because of the prices being so high, they end up just growing restless and then move on because they realize they can't buy something like that. Or it just kills their ambition and their interest in wanting to go and get that. Now, earlier discussing the whole, depending on who you talk to, retro is going to be something different for them. Let's look at a lot of younger people out there where retro games, their NES is going to be the PlayStation 1, or the PlayStation 2, or the Xbox, or for even some the Xbox 360. So are they going to be investing in quite the same way as those collectors? Probably not, because we haven't had nearly as much time to go and digest all of this and had enough time pass, though with the PlayStation 1, I guess that could be argued a bit different because that is 20 years old. But look at prices for PlayStation 1, Dreamcast, Sega Saturn games. Now, RGT 85 had brought up the whole thing of Sega Saturn games just continually just going up, up, up. Now, that makes a lot of sense considering that emulation for the Sega Saturn is still something that they haven't perfected, and you're not seeing digital re-releases of those games. So if you want to play titles on a system perfectly, then you're pretty much having to shell out for the real games. And considering the wealth of exclusive titles that are on there, it's not all that shocking that people are wanting to go and check this stuff out. Now also think about the numerous amounts of video game outlets out there online on YouTube in written physical format that discuss old school video games, and this is being discussed to a whole bunch of people out there that got to experience it firsthand and want to thrust themselves back into their childhood because nostalgia kind of runs this entire game, so they want to go and pick this stuff up. But now think about even younger people who never got to experience that, but they're being told by essentially their video game peers, so to speak, that this shit was amazing and you're missing out. Well, we already know that there is a certain amount of copies out there. Once those copies are all scooped up, there's still only a small handful left. So the price inevitably goes up because the demand is there, but the supply is limited, and the supply continually shrinks. More and more, so there isn't much there. I'm seeing PlayStation 1 games going for several $100s a piece. Games that just months ago, and in some cases years ago, were going for just a few dollars because nobody really cared. And that's because the market shifts with people who are starting to get interested in this. I've seen kids, I've seen teenagers, and I've seen young adults who suddenly are just like, yeah, I want to get into collecting video games, and I want to be all about having a big-ass video game collection and all that shit. Well, their retro games aren't going to be the same games that we consider to be retro. For me, I grew up with the Nintendo Entertainment System as my very first system, but theirs is a PlayStation 1 because their first system was in 1997. Well, if that's the case, a lot of games they're going to want are going to be on the PlayStation 1. So that's what they focus on, and if any of their friends, they end up talking all this into, getting interested in the same exact shit, they're all going to focus heavily on that. With all the other shit, not nearly as much, but the more invested that they get into retro gaming, old school gaming, and just video games in general, they're probably going to end up wanting to pick up something on the NES and all that shit. But is it going to be, are they going to be willing to shell out several $100s per title? Fuck no. But for a PlayStation 1, yeah, they're going to be. And think about the amount of folks out there right now that are starting to see that, oh man, things are tapering off, and they're selling their collections off by the boatload. We're talking about entire NES collections, entire Super Nintendo collections, entire TurboGrafx 16 collections, because they're seeing that, well, their investment isn't going to just keep growing, so now this is the time to just sell things off. And you can see that their collection wasn't really about them being into this, it was more just a straight up investment, nothing else and nothing more, and they want to get their money's worth out of it while they still can. Somebody like me, I want the retro bubble to honestly break. I want this shit to burst so I can buy games like this for dirt fucking cheap, because the overall value isn't what these games go for somebody like me. It's how fun are these games to play. If I pick up Shadows of the Damned for PlayStation 3, it's dirt fucking cheap. I can go get it at tons of stores out there. That game's very valuable to somebody like me because I enjoyed playing it. If I go over to my Sega Saturn collection and I'm just like, well, I want to go and play a game. Oh, I know what I'm going to play. I'm going to play Albert Odyssey. Well, Albert Odyssey is a fantastic RPG, but it's worth a lot of money to people. But it was worth a lot to me just because of my personal experience with it. So now you have completely different types of collectors out there, and some are more willing to shell out cash than others, depending on what is their end game. For somebody like me, the end game is eventually getting to play the games, experience them, get to find out about the worlds and the characters and the lore, everything having to associate with it. Other ones kind of just want to brag about what they have. Like, look, I have a complete Nintendo Wii collection, I have a complete PlayStation 2 collection, I have this, I have that, I have this, and it's still sealed. I have 15 copies of this, and they're sealed. I have the collector's edition and limited edition, and I have this and that and that and this. But that's really the only reason that they want it, so again, different types of people are going to be going into this, and if people are only interested in it for its monetary value, and they're seeing that eventually it just stops, then all of a sudden those people are unloading everything. Now you're left with just the people who are genuinely interested in wanting to get stuff like that. Not to go and say that the people that are into it just for monetary gain won't be around, because they'll be able to find, if they can go and flip something and make a buck, they sure as shit will. But there's so much to take into account with this, but I really do think that the retro gaming bubble hasn't bursted at all. I just think that it's evolving and changing, and considering that video game collecting is still a relatively new thing, you figure that video game collecting for a lot of people out there is something that started maybe like 5 to 10 years ago, and right now you're looking at somebody who's been collecting since 1997. That's how long I've been collecting video games for. And I got sick of just having to repurchase Final Fantasy VII, Castlevania Symphony of Night, and Final Fantasy Tactics over and over again. I played through all three games numerous different times, but I would trade them in to get other games, and then I had to go and trade other games to get them back so I could replay them, or borrow a friend's copy whenever they potentially had it. But eventually I got sick of doing that, and then I said, fuck it, I'm just going to keep my games from now on. The last time I even traded away my games was I traded my Sega Genesis collection for a bunch of Sega Saturn games. And the Sega Saturn games just went up in price because they weren't really around. The Genesis games, the ones that I got rid of, didn't really move all that much. Granted, there are expensive Sega Genesis games, make no mistake about it. Especially, oh man, the import scene gets absolutely ridiculous, but still, that's what I traded away. And that's something else that I guess we could go and bring up, is the import scene. I know for a fact that a lot of people who are from Europe and from the United States and Canada and all that shit have picked clean tons of different places and outlets in Japan, getting a bunch of import copies of games from stores, from online retailers, and a bunch of other shit. And people I know personally that live in Japan are just like, yeah, you could see a fucking tumbleweed going by, because import games just keep going up, because the amount of them that's available is so limited and so minuscule and small. And for anyone out there that wants to have something that's complete in a box, with the manual, with the inserts, and have the physical cartridge in their hand, obviously is going to be paying a pretty penny for it, because there's only several hundred or several thousand copies of something. And that's no different than right now. We have Limited Run Games, for example, who is putting out games for the PlayStation Vita and the PlayStation 4. I've got every single one of their releases so far for PlayStation 4, because I like a lot of indie games out there. And plenty of the ones that they've brought out, I was just like, fuck yeah, I'll go and get that. Both the Shanti games came out. And I like those a lot because they were fantastic platforming games, but there was only several thousand. But then you see that people are paying a large premium for them being flipped on eBay, because, again, if anybody thinks that they can make a buck, they will go and make a buck. But those are limited quantities, and the amount of physical copies that are out there is limited, small, and you aren't finding any more. Well, as time progresses, less copies of those are going to be made available, but it makes you wonder, down the road, how many people are truly going to give a shit, outside of those who lived through the era, about having a physical, tangible copy in hand that they can put inside of the system. That's going to decrease more and more, because we have future generations that are being brought up with digital everything. I mean, the digital marketplace continues to blow up more and more, because they don't have a need for physical games. They just want to go and download it and just experience the game that way. Then think about the advent of emulation. Emulation takes a big cut out of all these games, because you can go and experience it for free. And if there's a digital offering through something like the eShop, through something like Steam, through some PSN and all the other shit out there for these same exact games, and you can pay $8 versus $120, well, if all you want to do is just play the game, you go with the digital version and you don't bother with that. That means prices eventually start lowering, because nobody's paying that price at all. There's so many factors to go and take into account of something like this, and are they going to continue to decrease? It depends on demand. Demand is always going to be there. That's the truth. Gaming is a big time, huge, gargantuan hobby that just continues to just get bigger and bigger and bigger. But nostalgia tards like us are eventually going to want to go back and experience things from our childhood. You know, the golden years of when we were first experiencing games and really enjoying them, and when we actually had the time to sit down with these games and invest all of our free time, and even our not free time, into just playing that game. Then you become an adult and you don't have nearly the time for it, but you want to have that game back. So you go back to go and pick up that version, but you want to go and make sure that you have the complete version, so everything's very cool. Well, you're going to pay for it, because there isn't nearly as many around. But if you're a cheap motherfucker or a broke motherfucker, are you going to? Probably not. Because you don't care that much, you'll just get a digital version just so you can have the experience. So all these factors taken into account, I mean, my main point is just, I feel that there's a big shift with the retro gamers themselves, and it's an entire new breed of retro gamers who are coming into it. People that don't give a shit about something like NEO GEO and TurboGrafx-16, and those are at all-time highs, and both systems I enjoy, but won't even go anywhere near because it's too expensive. Now, if you have a collector like me that's very adamant about collecting, really loves collecting, and I won't even go near collecting for those two systems, that means that you shrink the amount of people that are willing to bother with it. And that means that when they're putting those games out there, and nobody's buying them, because even the most dedicated and diehard aren't willing to bother, now prices go down. And they continue to go down until somebody is willing to scoop them up, because that seems like a fair price. And they're not suddenly just coming to a compromise with their bank account and just saying, fuck it, oh yeah, I'll just go and do it, despite the fact that it's going to be emptied, and you can see little breadcrumbs there that not even the Grinch would bother with. But think about that for a moment, and that's shit that should be taken into account. digital marketplaces, re-releases of many of these games for current gen and whatever platform that you can possibly think of, emulation, and a shift in what is a retro gamer, because now their focus is going to be on completely different systems. I've seen PlayStation 2 games for going a lot more money. I've seen GameCube games. GameCube is blowing the fuck up. I mean, blowing up. So many of the games on GameCube are going for insane prices. I'm just like, I'm glad I got all my shit around the time that it came out, because I would not be paying what they're going for now. But you never know what the next system everybody's going to be collecting for is. And if everybody's focusing on that because that's where their interests lie, then there's no interest on those older systems, so everything goes down. But unless you're looking at the entire industry and take into account that some people don't consider that shit retro because they don't, that wasn't theirs. This was their retro. Well, that kind of changes their perspective and definition of everything and whether or not this retro gaming bubble is actually bursting. It's just evolving. That's my opinion, though. Opinions and thoughts on this entire thing, by all means, share them below. If you want to make a video discussing this, you can. If you haven't, go check out the CU Podcast video discussion about it, and check out RGT 85 discussing it, since, you know, his was a video that I watched, and I went and saw Pat and Ian's video, so I want to go and make a video response to Sean. Very fucking cool-ass guy, and, well, description. Just check in the description. Anyway, this is AlphaOmegaSin. As always, nerds, nerdettes, and gamers game the fuck on!